Welcome. This is the podcast series dedicated to living a revenue culture. Long-term business success and survival requires that to optimize that profit, you got to optimize your people, and you got to do that in a low friction context.
Mm.
So we're going to talk about how to do some of that today. And if you've been with us for a while, you know that we do two podcast releases a month, and we keep them active on our website and on the web forever, so you can always find them. And today I've got Gerrit Wheeler with me, and I'm thrilled because what we're talking about is something we've never really talked about before, and that is the structure. And Garrett's an expert in, he actually believes in things like AI and business intelligence and predictive analytics and machine learning. And not only does he believe in them, he thinks they can be your friend and that they can actually be part of your business at a cost you can afford. So I'm thrilled to have him with us today. He and I have had a chance to talk three or four times before. Every time I learn a lot. And his background, and I'm going to ask him to share that with you to start. He's been doing this for, I think, over 7 years. He's been in the sports media business. He's been in healthcare. He's been in technology, e-commerce, all kinds of really interesting places that a lot of us think are cool, but we never get to work there. So we're going to let him share some of those things with you today. And hopefully we're going to have some fun and we're all going to learn a whole bunch of new stuff. So Gerrit, welcome.
Thank you, Rick. I'm super excited to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity. Every time I talk to you, it seems like you get the point right away. I feel like you see the value, you see the advantage in what we do. So I really appreciate that. Always keeping an open mind. So yeah, introductions. My name is Gerrit Wheeler. I'm a data scientist and a business analyst. And essentially, what that means is that I help businesses make decisions and solve problems using data and analytics and machine learning and AI and all those big scary things, which we'll show you here are not too scary at all. So that's what I do. I've been working, as you mentioned, across industries, whether it's retail, e-commerce, healthcare, telehealth, quick serve restaurants. So I've really been able to craft the analytics skill set and these frameworks and paradigms for thinking across industries, across companies. So I think it's really been great at kind of enhancing my understanding of how we can really implement this kind of revenue culture that you're trying for. At the end of the day, too, what we're doing is your business tells a story. When you interact with
Yeah.
customers, when you interact with your clients, when your customers, or sorry, when your employees choose something to work on, your business tells a story, and that story is what we're here to help you read. We're here to help you collect these interactions, read the story, so that you can start to make better decisions, allocate your funds better, help to acquire more customers, and keep the customers you have. So, as I mentioned too, and these principles are applied across any industry, any business you can think of. Every business has customers, every business has expenses, and so if you have either of those things, you can use analytics.
Yeah. You got to make sure you have enough customers to cover those expenses every month.
Yeah, yeah, two sides of the equation, very important sides. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about, because I know you and I've talked about it before, but you've worked in some large, complex, uh, interesting industries. And what did you learn going through that? Because I know now you're an entrepreneur, and you're working for yourself and you're getting to bring your learnings to the table. What are some of the lessons you learned working for other people that have helped to drive you today?
Yeah, so some lessons I've learned from other people, and it's a great question. I feel every place I go, I try to take every opportunity to learn about the specific industry we're in, about business as a whole. So I've had a lot of great, and I've had a lot of great mentors as well. But one thing I feel like that I found, and we don't really teach in school, it's something I had to learn on the fly, was that marriage of business and technology. Sometimes you can have some people who love the business and ignore the technology, people who love the technology and ignore the business. So I feel like it's the marriage of the two. And specifically in our field, mine is the analytics side. So it's not necessarily the tech side, it's the data and what the data can show you. So some things I've learned, is I think how to be a really good leader is one thing that I learned as well, which is how to enable, how to delegate, how to empower. and how to be really be a facilitator as well too. And I think that's what we really try to focus on in the service that we provide at Wise is we try to really enable and empower. So as I'll mention kind of in a little bit here too, I think that's where the marriage of our service with the culture really comes into play when you can have leaders empowering their kind of frontline workers. You know, whether we're talking
Yep.
about kind of accountants or salespeople, managers, anybody that you consider kind of working on the front line, really doing the day-to-day tactical stuff. We find that when you have an alignment, you have visibility, you can really start to get things done. Whether it's your allocating resources better, as I mentioned,
Yeah.
talking to customers better, picking which projects and which initiatives to work on. So as I mentioned, too, good leadership is about empowerment. It's about enabling, and I think that's what we try to do as well too with this kind of analytics and the visibility. We try to enable people and empower them to make decisions themselves, ones that they're confident in.
I'm going to ask you a question. I had no intention of asking this question, but as I'm listening,
Sure.
I'm putting together a podcast we did yesterday, I think, and we were talking about how I don't know if it's difficult or it's just not on people's radar to do research about their prospective client before they meet them.
Mm,
Now, is AI one of those tools that could help me understand who I'm going to be meeting with and what their industry's like and what their business is like before
sure.
I actually get there?
Yeah, absolutely. If we're talking about the kind of specific set of AI in terms of, these tools that we've been
Yeah.
introduced the last couple of years in terms of Chat GPT, Perplexity, these large language models, which are kind of interactive chatbots, right? Is that kind of
Yeah.
what we're, yeah,
Well, or even if I were going to call on let's say I specialize in a specific industry, restaurants, and I wanted to know about this restaurant compared to the industry, or,
sure,
compared to, because you've done some restaurant work in your past, fast food versus, family versus, elegant kind of things. Does it
sure.
help me understand nuances by location or by city or?
Yeah. So I think one thing I tend to tell people about these new AI tools that we're being used, we know how great they are, but I think one thing I like to tell people or steer people towards is use them for search and summarization. I think they're great tools for that. They're great tools for searching. So if you're trying to get some information about your prospective
Yeah.
restaurant client, it's a great tool for searching and synthesizing information about what they do, where they are located, things like that. So I think it's a great tool for search. It's a great tool for summarization. I think though, one thing that it's missing that we still really need the human aspect is we kind of really need that human secret sauce still, I think. The humans really need to have the creative ideation that goes into the AI as well. So I find that if you want to find, search things about your
Yeah,
prospective
yeah,
clients,
yeah,
maybe summarize the industry as a
yeah,
whole
yeah,
or
yeah,
industry trends. I think it's great for that. I think it's a great tool to make people more efficient in their learning and their understanding.
yeah,
But I think in terms of the ideation, the
yeah,
inspiration, I still think that has to come from that's got to come from a human source. I think
yeah,
the AI tools are great at looking at associations. They're really, really, really strong, complex statistical associations. But at the end of the day, they lack that imagination. They lack the creativity. So I feel that's the way I tend to prescribe these tools to people is use them for search summarization.
That makes tremendous sense because from the sales side, if I'm going to call on a company, they really expect two things from me, three things. They expect I know them before I go.
Yeah,
They don't want me to show up and say, "Well, tell me about your business." That's a waste of everybody's time
sure,
since the data probably exists out there if I were not so lazy I didn't look it up. The
sure,
second thing is they expect me to help them understand things I understand
mm,
applied to their business.
absolutely,
So that's that innovation or creativity, or that certain locations, or if you just do breakfast and lunch, here are some things that we've learned, uh,
sure,
and we tie that into your financial planning. And then the third thing is they assume I'm bringing them something that if they could imagine it, might like to consider it. So that's
sure,
all the creativity and innovation pieces. So that
absolutely.
It sounds like
Yeah.
that could be a good fit.
Oh, absolutely. As you mentioned too, the real creation and the imagination aspects and what you just mentioned is the marriage of the two, the marriage
Yeah,
of your customers' problems with your expertise. I feel like that's the real creative kind of imaginative human side that we can bring to it. And then if you want to use the AI to kind of maybe propose some strategies or
sure.
some tactics, I think that's a great way to do it. If you can tell the AI what your goal is, what your expertise, give it some extra, some extra context and extra background, I think you do a great job of proposing some strategies, proposing some, as you mentioned too. This is actually one that I took from you, Rick, is that we don't do demos, right? We do previews. You want to understand what the customer needs, and you want to come prepared with something that you already applied what you know to what their problems are. So
Yeah.
I feel like that's absolutely AI could help with that, no doubt. Except you've already got the expertise in your head. It can definitely help you ideate,
Yep.
strategize, propose different things as well. So I think it's a great tool for that.
Yeah, and I did not anticipate us going through this piece, but one of the biggest gaps in organizations trying to grow a revenue culture is they say, well, I can't find my client. And when
Mm,
you take a step back, what you see is most of the time they find too many because
sure.
the internet gives us an infinite list of who could be your client, and they have no way to focus. And if, as I'm listening to this conversation, I'm going, wow, I could think about this helping me focus.
Yeah.
So I really am talking to the right people for the right reasons. So that was,
And Ricky, you hit something right on the head too. It's that when you've got small and mid-sized business owners and leaders, they've been working on the day to day. They've kind of been
yeah,
in the forest for so long. They're starting to lose the forest for the trees, right? And that's just it just happens. It happens to all of us.
yeah, it
And so
does.
I think that the revenue culture there, I think one thing that we do as a service is, anybody can give you blind metrics and analytics. I think the goal, what we try to do is to help you guys figure out what direction you should be looking. Right? It's looking at what are the specific metrics. I've got so many clients that collect all this data and they have analysis paralysis every day. They run something, they've got 7 metrics they look at, 4 are positive, 3 are negative, and that's not helpful at all. So one thing that we like to do is we like to try to align with your business goals and your business purpose. So
Yeah,
if you are a client or you are an organization that relies on repeat business, customer repurchases, you should probably focus on a retention metric. You should be looking at your customer lifetime value. You should be looking at how often you retain or how often you communicate with these customers. So as you mentioned too, there's an aspect of figuring out what to measure and what to look at as well.
yeah, it's interesting. You used one of my favorite terms that typically we don't do a good job with, and that's purpose.
Mm,
And as you were talking about the forest for the trees, so many of us get into tactical excellence
mm,
and we forget the tactic was there to support a purpose.
yeah.
And today there's pretty good research that says you want to hire people who believe in the business's purpose
Mm,
because they have more fun at work
mm,
and you have much better a chance of creating partners with customers who
mm,
share your purpose.
yeah.
So that recognition of purpose and not the focus on the single transactional excellence that may or may not be very related to the purpose
Yeah.
is very interesting. Well, while we're talking about purpose, tell me about the purpose of your business. Because
Yeah.
we're going to ask you about your business model in a minute, and your
Sure.
business model is really cool. And my sense is you had a purpose behind it when you created it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, the goal it started with a need to fill, right? That's where it started. Was a purpose to try to explicate her, to try to give my client. So what we do is we offer a customer data platform. In which case, what we do is we integrate with all of your existing software systems, whether they're your expense tracking system, your email marketing system. What we try to do is we try to collect all this data, we try to transform it, put it into a usable format, and then we try to help you access it, right? So we want to push it back into some of your systems so that you can use these analytics. We want to try to give you reports so you can see and have visibility into what you're doing. So that's what we do. And it started about 3 4 years ago. We were going from kind of me and my colleagues were going from industry to industry, company to company, and they were all building their own analytic systems from scratch, right? So they were building their data collection
Yeah.
systems, processing, all these systems they were building from scratch. It was costing millions of dollars. It was costing years at a time, and hiring your own headcount of an entire team you had to manage. And they were all pretty much the same systems. They were different versions of the same thing. So what we decided to do was we decided to just build essentially one set of analytic systems that we could recycle for our different clients. We'd be able to give them basically the feeling of an entire analytics team, but for kind of a fraction of the cost and a fraction of the time to set it up as well. So that's what we offer, and I'd love to talk too about the kind of the cultural shift there that we see,
Yeah.
where this really starts to take over at a client too. But that's our purpose. Our purpose was not to just kind of collect metrics and give you data. The purpose was to kind of help you guys read that story, as we mentioned earlier. There's a digital story that your company is creating. We want to help you read that, help you, spend your money better, understand your customers and your market better. That's the purpose. We're really trying to help you understand and give feedback from your business.
I love the fact you keep using the word story. And I don't think I have ever intentionally had a conversation about data as a story. But
Hmm.
as soon as you say it, it makes so much sense
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
and it points to um, interesting areas or trends or scary things or
Sure.
uh, say more about how you help people think about data as, I think a lot of us think of data as a necessary evil.
Sure.
And,
Absolutely.
my bank wants to know my receivables turn or,
Sure.
and I don't want to know either.
Yeah. Or
How
your
do you,
social security number, right? Yeah.
yeah, how do you get clients to think about it as a story?
Yeah, I think it's in one the first step is having them step back from those tactical decisions, right? I think that's the first step. And I think it helps to start the conversation with something like this, something more broad. What's the purpose? What's your goals in your companies? What are your short-term goals? What are your long-term goals? Right? What do you see as the real value that you provide to your clients? And from when we start there, that's where we start to kind of break it down. You can break sales down into demand, into supply, into satisfaction, right? So you can always break it down to these individual aspects that everyone understands. Everyone intuitively
Yeah.
understands, I think, the demand and the supply aspect of every business. So I think it's in us framing the data in terms of these aspects. Well, let's look at your operations. Let's look at your demand. Let's look at your supply and your inventory management. So I think those are how we like to. That's how we can kind of craft the story and craft the narrative. Is you have all these disparate pieces of data everywhere that you're collecting, but at the end of the day, each one of these pieces of data it tells you one piece of the story, whether it's your demand, your
Yeah.
operations, your employee satisfaction. So I think when you can kind of start from a top-down explanation, hey, what's the purpose? And you start with those intuitive understandings
Yeah.
of the way business works, people will start to fill in the gaps in their head. People have way more expertise in their own business than I ever could. And so essentially what we can do is we can create that marriage of their understanding and then our ability to give them visibility, give them feedback so that then they can start to delegate this purpose to the rest of their organization. They can start to once their organization's aligned, they know what their goal is, they know what
Wow.
metrics transfer to that goal. Then you really see that cultural shift. That's where you see the cultural shift in terms of now the decisions are no longer being made by the loudest person in the room or the most senior person in the room. You can start to delegate those decisions to team leads and directors. You give them the initiatives, and then they can start to create their own projects, their own kind of experiments, and then they get to see the feedback real time, right? So they can see if their goal is to reduce. So, for instance, I'll do more of an example based
Yeah,
here.
yeah, please.
Worked with one client who was in kind of a digital sports streaming base, and they were so for the first kind of 4 or 5 years of their existence, they were really focused on growth and acquisition. But at the end of the day, their business model was a recurring revenue model. They had a
Yeah.
subscription that they offered to their customers, right? So that in and of itself creates kind of a dichotomy where you've got to focus on growth and acquisition and getting new customers, but the crux of your business model is really focused on repeat customers, on
Yeah.
existing customers. So what we did was we helped them kind of create a transition to think an organizational wide transition in thinking where let's stop thinking about growth and let's start thinking about retention. So what they did was they crafted what they called kind of the year of the customer was what they called it.
Ooh,
And they decided that, and they told the entire organization, this is the year of the customer. Here are our metrics, right? Our key performance indicators in this case, or customer retention. And then what they did was that allowed, so now that you've got the entire organization aligned on the goal, you've got them now knowing exactly what the metric is that they're trying to influence. Now you can start to delegate these things down to the lower levels, right? So you can actually give it to your team leads, whether it's your marketing team, your sales team, operations. And now that they know what the goal is and they have visibility into the goal, they can start to run their own initiatives, right? So they'll understand better than the executives will. So they can start to run their own projects, their own initiatives, and then see how those impact the metrics that they've been chosen in terms of retention, customer value. And then now you don't have to, now there's no guesswork in terms of what's a successful project, which one
oh, yeah,
actually
yeah.
increases.
Wow.
So now you know actually which are winners, and then also you know the size of their impact as well.
Yeah. I thank you for that story. And it touches, you started out earlier talking about the largeness and the ability to start to see in all those places. That's a great example. As you were telling the story, when you said they created the year of the customer,
Mm-hmm.
what I heard was the ear of the customer.
Oh, okay.
And as you told the story, it could be both.
Sure.
And I love the ear of the customer
Mm,
because in the revenue world, we tend to project what we believe to be true as if it were a fact, as opposed to a projected assumption.
sure.
And in that example, people could actually hear the customer respond based
Sure.
on they do a new ad. Well, do they get half as many people going to the website or four times as many people going to the website? Do they
Sure.
stay on the website for uh, zero point 0.7 seconds or do they stay for 2 minutes?
Sure.
And so you were both doing the year of the customer, and in my imagination, you were hearing the
Sure.
customer very clearly. And I think that's what you were telling me about how marketing would use it versus how engineering might use it or
Absolutely.
product development might use it.
Yeah, I think that's a great designation there. I mean, I think, like you said, it both works both ways. And now we're starting to listen to the customer. We're starting to respond to the customer. So I think whether it's the year or the ear, I think they both work. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I found that fascinating and a great way to teach because so many of us are, it's easy to declare it's the year of the customer, but then we have to do something.
Sure. Yeah.
And hearing the customer is a good place to start.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, absolutely. That's a good one. Yeah. Figuring out what they like is probably the first step, what they need.
Yeah. And one of the things when we think about living a revenue culture, we recognize that revenue is the result of value transfer from the seller to a buyer who's happy to pay for it.
Sure.
If the buyer doesn't see value, then there is no value, at least to that buyer.
Sure.
And it's interesting how seldom people even think about this.
Mm,
But in that year of the customer story, you and I don't know specifically that people did this, but they could be viewing the value that's being transferred. And every time they try something new or different, they can see how the market views the value that that new or different process or product alteration or whatever it did was interpreted by the customer as more value or less value.
absolutely. Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail right on the head. What we physically do, what we provide are software and data, but really the value we provide is the visibility, is the feedback, it's the data informed aspects of ideation, of execution. I think that's the real, as you mentioned, those are the real value transfer there. Like I said, we know what we provide, it's software and it's AI, but the real value transfer is in the visibility. It's in everyone wanting to see. We see this shift that happens in our clientele where once the executives, they've always wanted to look at their metrics too, but once the executives start sharing these metrics, they start
Yeah.
sharing this with the clients, or sorry, with their employees want to see it too. We see the employees want to see the metrics. The employees want to see that, they want feedback, as you're saying. They want to know how the market, how the customer responds to them.
Yeah. Um, Again, this wasn't something I was thinking of up front, but you're really heavily in the change business. You're helping organizations change and whether they think of it that way or not, you're helping them measure whether they're actually doing it. Is that a true statement?
Sure.
D- And
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. As I just mentioned before, sometimes there's it creates a definitive marker, right? We're
yeah,
quantifying the impact of things. Instead of it becoming a political lobby, we've now got a measurement of the impact, whether
yeah,
it's, like I said, it's on our top line revenue, on our customer retention. We've got an actual measurable impact. So as I mentioned before, I see this at every company where kind of the most senior person, the loudest person in the room, they not only decide the initiatives, they also decide how successful they were,
yeah,
right?
absolutely.
We've all heard. Yeah.
The
So I
winners
think
write the
that's one of the great
history.
things we give is, yeah, exactly. They rewrite their own history. Exactly. So I feel like that's one of the main pieces of value that we provide is that visibility, that feedback, and then like I mentioned, it can disseminate throughout the entire organization. And we find that we've got, some of the value that we provide. As I mentioned, we physically provide software and AI and analytics, but the value we provide are these intangibles that are really hard to measure on an income statement. So it's allocation of resources being deployed better.
Yeah.
It's higher employee satisfaction because now you've got employees who feel empowered and they feel trusted to make these decisions. You've got leaders and executives who feel more confident in delegating because now they know that everyone's aligned. They know that everyone's watching the same set of metrics and they're listening to the same set of responses from the market or anything else. So I think that's absolutely no, you're absolutely right there in terms of the value transfer. We should all focus on everyone makes the decision based on the dollars and cents, but I think they stay based on the intangible benefits, that
Yeah.
value transfer that you mentioned.
Well, one of the things we've tried to teach people for over 25 years is a simple formula. When you're going to make a decision, before you make the decision, answer the question, what's the leverage you expect for
Mm,
having made the decision? And we specifically suggest they focus on, does it create more suspects? Does it create more prospects?
mm,
Does it create more qualified prospects? Does it move more qualified prospects to a contract? Or does it increase the amount that we actually deliver to people who paid us?
mm.
So if you're making a decision and it doesn't create positive leverage across those, then you have to ask yourself, why are you making that decision?
Absolutely. Yeah.
But nobody ever does it. I don't know whether it's the thinking of those five things is too hard, or they don't think they know how to anticipate. And
Mm,
we don't suggest they have to know, but believe you're making the decision for a reason
sure.
and then measure how well it worked. Because if it's great, you want to do a lot more of it.
Sure.
And if it's not so great, you either want to fix it or quit doing it.
Sure. Absolutely.
I'm just listening, and your offer to the market is that could become an SOP that's virtually instantaneous
Mm,
because
the goal.
yeah, wow, that's pretty cool.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. It's
So
I've really enjoyed, as I mentioned too, one of my favorites is kind of the marriage of business strategy and kind of the analytics of the two. Because as you mentioned too, there's anytime you meet an analyst or a data scientist, if they're trying to make things more complicated, run away. Yeah. As you mentioned, you want people who simplify things, who tend to, I think that's one thing is that we do as well is you mentioned all these great designations of prospects, qualified prospects, and it's coming from someone with a background and expertise like yours, where you've seen it across the board, you've seen it across industries. I think it's easier. I think it's an easier framework for you to fit into. Whereas,
Yeah.
one thing we help do is we help designate those, right? So if you want to know who are your super users, who are your super
Yeah.
engaged customers versus your kind of, your weekend engaged customers, or you're barely on the fence guys. So these are something that we can help you guys analyze as well. So we can kind of create rules and designations. So for instance, one thing I've helped do as well, I worked with a professional sports league, and they wanted to know who were their super fans, who were their super
Yeah.
engaged
Yeah.
fans,
Yeah. Yeah.
who were their people where if you send them a free T-shirt and you let it, and they'll stay there for the rest of your life, right? For the rest of their lives. And then they want to know who are the people who are on the fence, who are brand new to the sport, who are maybe not yet convinced that it's a fun sport. And you want to treat those people differently, like you were saying. You want to make sure you have a strategy in place
Yeah.
to positively affect all groups. But that helps you prioritize as well as a little bit, right? Is that
Yeah.
your super engaged fans, you can kind of prioritize them a little bit less. You know they're going to be there, and you can start to allocate your resources a little bit better, whether it's your marketers, your salespeople. So I think that's a great designation there in terms of how do you think about it, how do you deploy the kind of what's the problem you're solving, and how does it affect all these different groups of people,
So
customers.
I'm imagining now that I work for one of your new clients. Um, do you do you have to train uh, my CEO? Do you have to train the people in manufacturing or sales or supply chain, or even if train's the wrong word, do you have to help us think differently? Or,
Sure.
what do you do to help us get from where we are today to the kinds of things you're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. No, as you mentioned, you hit the nail right on the head. We can supply as much data and analytics as possible, but if there's no data fluency at that organization, or there's no kind of real maturity around data and usage, then it's really useless, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you can give people the best analytics in the world, but if they can't read it, it's entirely useless. So we find that a lot of what we do is that kind of educational piece. It's creating data fluency. It's making sure that everything's simple enough so that people understand the story as soon as they look at it, right? We've all seen these complicated reports and dashboards,
Oh,
and
yes.
those are they're the worst. They're terrible. They don't give you any information. They don't tell you what you're doing is right or wrong or anything like that. So um, I think that data fluency is a huge piece of what we try to do, and we're trying to do a lot of that going forward as well. Is trying to create that data fluency. And as I mentioned before, it is a lot of a top-down approach.
Yeah.
It really does come from the leadership wanting to look at the data, wanting to show the data and share the data with others at the company. So we find that once that kind of takes hold at the top executive level, once they start being very liberal and generous with sharing the data, we find that other people kind of start they get interested to it kind of automatically. Except
Yeah.
they realize they were a little bit afraid of the data beforehand. We've made it accessible. They see the
Yeah.
value in the data, and then that's where we really start to see the those benefits really kick in.
Again, we're having a great conversation, none of which I was expecting. So this is good.
Great,
Um, Imagining who's watching this, I'm assuming there are consultancies, engineering firms, all kinds of people who help other people make their business better.
sure.
Are they partners for you? Where they understand the power of data analytics. They don't know how to do it, but they understand the power of it. I mean, are they potential partners for you?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It's someone who understands more about marketing. We can provide them the tools, and a consultant can really, really apply that secret sauce. Whether it's crafting initiatives around the data that we've given or the metrics we've supplied. So I find that we're a bit more of a facilitator for some of those people, is right.
Okay,
Whether they're revenue consultants, marketing
sure.
consultants, we focus a lot on customer analytics, but we do a lot on operational analytics as well too. And like I said, I feel like we are more of an enabler, right? So we can help customers find what to measure, what their goals are, what initiatives should be. But someone who has more of an experience coming from marketing consultant, they're going to know way more than we will. So that's a great partnership there in terms of not only that, we actually help them prove out a lot of what they do as well. If you're a marketing consultant and you've crafted these strategies, maybe the client doesn't hasn't had a great reporting tools just
Yeah,
yet. So what we do is what we provide that reporting tool so that you can say, hey, my initiative was this successful, or my initiative was not
yeah.
successful. So like you mentioned before, it's a lot of it we're enabling those that visibility and the feedback. But at the end of the day, though, the special sauce comes from people's understanding of the business and their understanding of the clientele.
Wow. I'm just imagining in my work or a lot of other people's work I can think of, this could be, it could take months or years out of projects and, get results, meaningful results much faster. Um, and you've talked repeatedly about starting at the CEO level and having been a consultant for many decades. Sometimes we get to start there. Sometimes we start in um, different entry points.
Hmm,
And you just mentioned marketing. I could absolutely see a CMO wanting to work with you, and I can see a supply chain person or quality control or sales or HR wanting to apply you in a division or in a department and then taking it up to other parts of the organization. Do you come in that way as well?
absolutely. Yeah, we've had one client specifically. We started with their marketing department kind of exclusively. And then once other people at the organization started seeing what we provided, that it blew up after that. We had, it went up to the C level, it went down to the kind of the team level and the frontline worker level, but we can absolutely come in at any level of an organization, and it kind of spreads. It's a little bit viral, to be honest. It goes viral at an organization once they see what we can provide and the feedback and the visibility that we provide.
Yeah, because in a lot of the consulting work over the years, often will start in a business unit, particularly
Sure,
one that just got acquired. And,
sure.
they got major metrics they got to meet. And, you could help them meet those metrics. And, then the rest of the organization, just like the marketing example, is going to say, how'd you do that?
Absolutely, yeah. We
Yeah.
find that a lot. Yeah, we find, as I said, it tends to spread out from there, and then we get asked to make reports for this department or this leader here. So it spreads pretty quickly.
So let's take a look at the future. And
Sure,
there's probably lots of people watching this think you're way out in the future already. But, you know, I don't think that's true. I mean, I think you're helping us fulfill a future a lot of us has had hoped was coming, but we
sure.
didn't know what tools were going to drive it for us. But what do you see as trends out there that business unit managers, CEOs, entrepreneurs should be aware of, should be thinking
Sure.
about? We know
Yeah,
we're going to have less employees, we're just birthing less babies. So,
sure.
I don't know if that's part of it, but what do you see coming that the work you're doing is going to, make more valuable?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you know, I'm sure I'm not alone in seeing the trend that we are starting to give software and AI more control of a lot of these tactical decisions, right? We're starting to see that software and AI are starting to become employees at our business.
Yeah.
So they're handling more day to day, whether it's communicating with clients or alerting restocks for inventory. Software and AI is going to continue to take more and more significant roles in our organizations. That's the trend I think we've seen for the last 30 years, and I don't see it stopping anytime soon, especially with the whole suite of tools that are kind of coming out nowadays. So I think that's the trend, and I think the goal to position yourself well enough to extract value from the software and AI that it kind of becomes a new employee for you. It's really what we've been talking about. It's the purpose and the culture, right? So at that point, your purpose and your culture have an even more direct impact on your bottom line because your software is now an employee and it doesn't make its own decisions either. So you've got to program in the right goals, the right incentives, the right purpose, and you've got to have people at your organization, the people who manage these software systems, the people who manage these AI systems. You want them to be aligned as well because there's a whole wide array of different things they can do now with this software and this AI that you've really got to have good alignment. You got to have a great culture that's data informed, where people are making these decisions based on data, not based on politics or gut feeling or anything like that. So that's the trend that I really see. I just see that once software and AI becomes a bigger part of our business, we tend to think that, oh, the software and the AI are kind of going to take care of itself, but it's not really. It's the software and the AI are always a reflection of your people, your purpose, your culture. So I think that's where later down the road, we're going to see culture have a much more direct impact, I think, on our profit and our bottom line.
I think that is fascinating. I had never conceived of it that way, but you and I talked about this a little bit earlier today. We in revenue science look at the world and say that the purpose and the strategy is at that highest level, and it sets the direction and it sets the value that we are going to try and transfer to the world. And then the second level is you build structure, and structure can be a plan, it can be language, it can be tools, it can be software, it can be
Sure,
teamwork. All those structure things are there to help the purpose be fulfilled, the why actually
sure,
occur. And then there's that third level, which is execution, which is, somebody shovels the snow, or somebody plants the seed in the field, or
sure,
somebody, uh, you know, takes uh, and smooths a finish on a product.
sure,
What I'm hearing you say is the AI, I love the AI as an employee. And
sure,
the fact that it's not the decision making, the why creating employee, it's really the employee at level three, the execution level, and part of level two, it's an enabling tool set to make
sure.
the execution better. And that alone's fascinating. But the other thing that you're describing to an ex-management professor is you're telling me that I can make strategy real time.
Sure.
Instead of thinking, we used to think of strategy, you got a 10-year plan, then you got a 3-year plan, and then you get,
Sure.
you're really saying what you have, and maybe I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but what I'm hearing is you're telling me I can have a purpose and I can morph my strategy by the week or by the day
Absolutely.
based on the changes in the world. Oh, we have a pandemic. Oh, we have a great recession. Oh, we have inflation. And I can keep my direction, keep my purpose, and I'm able to make changes to get as close to my purpose as possible based on the reality of understanding what's really going on.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. No, I think you hit the nail right on the head there. It's I've mentioned it several times before. It's that visibility, it's that feedback that you can get as close to real time as possible, right? So that as you mentioned, you pick a direction. That's kind of one thing we like to encourage is people picking a direction where you're going, whether it's a market, a value proposition, and then along the way, kind of experiment along the way. Figure out what's the best way forward. What are the actual steps you're going to take in that direction, right? What's the path forward? And you don't have to do it based on gut feeling or based on guesswork anymore, right? You can start to design these experiments. Whether I always try to encourage people to be kind of business scientists or business experimenters, where don't pretend like you know everything about the market or your customer or even about your product, right? Instead, design experiments where you can test these things, look for feedback, and then adjust accordingly. So as you're saying, strategy doesn't necessarily have to be something you do once a year. It can be something you do once a quarter, once a month, like you mentioned, once a week, right?
Um,
It can be, hey, how are we doing? What are we looking? Are we meeting our goals? Should we adjust? Do we change tactics? So I think that's a huge piece of value that we provide is that visibility, the feedback, and the leadership. The ability to change and know confidently that you're going in the right direction.
I, I'm going to show my age. Um, it way back when you wanted to be a supervisor, which meant, I knew how to make a tool or a die or something like that, and I would supervise other people doing it because I was really good at it.
Sure.
And then you get, managers who manage a bunch of tool and die makers that are out there doing it, but they're managing it because they're still pretty good tool and die makers, and they
Sure.
they can still look at it. And now we're now defining leaders in a way where you don't just lead that whole group of tool and die makers, but you really are responsible for concept and direction and purpose and worthy intention and the direction all those things go in, and you're responsible for what's possible.
Sure. Sure. Absolutely. It comes back to that kind of enablement piece before. Instead of us kind of passing down tactics from on high. The
Yeah.
goal is to really allow those frontline people, the people who are actually building the widgets or making the die, you want to enable them to make the best possible product in real time, right? So that and enable them to have feedback so they can understand what they're doing.
And one of the things in smart revenue science we talk about all the time is every organization needs to be conscious of whether their headquarters out, which
Mm,
means I get up in the morning and I really think about how do I make money from my customer,
mm,
which is a legitimate thing to do, or I'm buyer back, which means I get up in the morning and I ask myself the question, how do I make money with my customer?
mm.
You're now alerting me to the fact I can use the kinds of capabilities you bring me to be much more intimate with my customer than I could have been 5 years ago. Is that?
Absolutely. Absolutely, especially with the prevalence of software systems that we use and interact with customers with, and if you have a great system behind that to kind of collect and look at these
Yeah, yeah.
interactions, like I said, that's that kind of customer story that we want to look at. And if you have these systems in place, that story becomes real time, right? You can read it as it's happening. So absolutely.
So full circle, I not only need an internal story, but if I want to be buyer back, I've got to figure out how to review and tell the story of my market or my customer or my buyer or my
Absolutely.
community. Wow. You just made a lot more work for me. I got to do a whole bunch of things I wasn't doing. Uh,
No, we help with that, I promise.
okay. So most of this wasn't what we'd scripted, but it's really cool.
No, it's been great.
So tell me, first, for new people coming into the market, and today we badly need a group of blue collar workers
Mm,
that we needed 70 years ago, and then we kind of said everybody should get a degree and be a white collar worker.
sure.
But new people coming in the market, whether they're working in a chip factory or whether um, they're putting Teslas back together, or they're accountants or new lawyers or whatever. What should they be thinking about as it relates to the the opportunities you're bringing to the market? And then the follow-up question is going to be, what should their boss or the owner of their company be thinking about to make the best place to work that creates the maximum outcomes possible?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as I thought about this question, I think my advice turned out to be almost the same for both of those people, whether they're breaking into a new industry as kind of one of those frontline kind of workers, the people actually, the operators, or whether it's a leader. And I mentioned this once before. I really think that it's the best thing you can do for your entire career, even for your entire personality, I think, is to adopt that kind of lifelong learning. The idea of being an experimenter or kind of a
Yeah,
scientist. So it's
curiosity.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So we all tend to think of, hey, okay, I got my skill set. Now I'm going to go find my position, right? When in the end of the day, skill sets change. They change, and especially nowadays, they change so fast. I can't even imagine being, somebody
Yeah.
who works with their hands and having to keep up with that, the software, machinery, everything else. So I think one thing that I can give, the piece of advice I can give to both people entering a new field, entering the workforce, is be an experimenter, be a lifelong learner. don't assume you have all the expertise or all the knowledge. Play around with some new tools, right? Maybe even if it's a tool like ChatGPT, which has nothing to do with making widgets or dyes, right? Try it out. See, does it help you? Could it help you at all? Either whether it's even 1% efficiency, anything like that. So I think being a lifelong learner, I think adopting the personality of an experimenter, someone who's willing to take these risks, try new things, and that leads me to kind of the leadership as well. I think leadership absolutely have to be more experimenters. So for instance, one of the biggest experiments that we probably all either heard or haven't heard of is Amazon Web Services, right?
Yeah.
Amazon Web Services, if they were to spin off on their own, they'd be a Fortune 500 company right now, right? And they started as an experiment. Andy Jassy in 2010, in 2003, I think it was, came to Jeff Bezos and said, "Hey, we've got all this unused server space. Let's run an experiment where we rent out the server space and kind of almost create a new vertical there." And here we are 20 years later looking at the results of that experiment. So I think I encourage all leaders and then also all kind of the frontline workers as well too, is to be experimenters. It's don't assume you know whether it's your customers, your product, your market. Always be an experimenter. Try new things, and I think that's one thing we help facilitate as well too. It's hard to experiment when you don't get that feedback, when you don't know how your experiment turned out. So I think coupling with our service where you can start to look at the feedback, where you run an experiment, you get immediate feedback. Okay, that did not increase our retention. That did increase our retention. Did not increase acquisition. I think that's where we can really enable that experimentation culture to go throughout the entire organization as well. So I think it starts with leadership, willing to be confident, to delegate, and letting their kind of frontline people experiment, but also experimenting at the leadership level as well.
Yeah, I love your answer, and it evokes as a supervisor, manager, or leader, it pretty much tells me I need to encourage my creative, curious, innovative people to share
Sure.
and to collaborate and to think of these things as part of their responsibility is to make all the rest of us smarter.
Sure. Yeah. I like that. Yeah.
So, so this has been great. So, last thing, what would you like to leave us with? What would you like us to be knowing and thinking about so that when we come across you in the real world and we should be hiring you or partnering with you, what should we know? Or, and maybe it's the same thing you've just told us, but how should we prepare ourselves to be a great partner with you?
Sure. Yeah. So I've talked a lot about kind of the cultural shift that we see kind of when your organization starts to become kind of data informed. But in reality, I know most people listening to this right now, they already have their kind of misconceptions or preconceived notions about analytics, right? They hear about it in Moneyball or,
Yeah.
and the NBA or things like that. So I think there's kind of two misconceptions that are normally held, which I'd love to dispel right now too, is number one, it's the data is a lot more accessible and easy to understand than you think, right? I think people have been thrown a lot of numbers, equations, data has been thrown at them. I think there hasn't been a very good job of telling people the story, teaching people to read the story. So I think that's number one right there is understand that data and analytics are so much more accessible than you could think. Everyone tends to think that we've got people who tend to think they're good at math or smart or bad at math. And I think there's nobody who's bad at math. I think they've just been explained incorrectly. So I
Yes.
think that's number one is everybody, you can use the data, you can use the analytics. I promise it takes a little bit of massaging to make it a little accessible, but I think, try to experiment, try to grab some data, look at it a little bit, try to analyze it a little bit. So I think whether you're asking someone to do that for you or you want to try your own
Yep.
handed analysis, I would say it's not as scary as you think. It's much more accessible than you think. So that's kind of misconception number one. It's the data and the analytics. I know it seems inaccessible, but I promise it's very easy to use. And then number two, I think the other thing we see is, with that kind of Moneyball kind of preconceived notion is that there's this idea that we're going to come in and try to tell you guys how you're doing your business wrong. And I think that's such a bad misconception. That is our intention with the analytics is not to tell anybody they're doing anything wrong. It's to give people feedback into what you're doing and just visibility into what you're doing. The clients we work with are going to understand their business and their customers so much better than we ever could. that I think it would be arrogant for us to say that oh, just follow the analytics, don't trust your gut at all. So that's one thing we like to marry is there's if the data tell a story. I think this was Jeff Bezos who said this as well, going back to another Amazon, is that he said if the data tell one story and then the anecdotes tell another story, it means you need to go back and look at data again, right? It means you need to redo. It means you need to redo your data, right? So I think that would be my other piece of advice too, is that you know analytics it's not here to tell you you're doing anything wrong. It's here to kind of give you some feedback into what you're doing, give you a little more visibility.
Wow. Um, wow. Very, very cool. And Garrett, I can't thank you enough for being here today and sharing this. And I want to say to all the people watching, we didn't dive into your business model for your clients today, but I just want to say to everybody, this guy has a great business model that almost any mid-sized company can do business with him and not feel like they can't afford it. So all his information's on the screen. If this is interesting to you, you got to learn the business model because he's really done a masterful job of creating a business model to match why he's in business. Yeah.
Thank you, Rick. I really appreciate that. And all of course, all of your expertise and your opinions have been considered in every aspect. So they're incredibly valuable. So I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for being here today. And I thank all of you for joining us and being part of this. And we'll reach out to Gerrit. I guarantee you your time will be well spent. And if there's anything we can help you with at the revenue game, we're here for you as well. And we'll have another one of this type in another 2 weeks. So thank you.
Thank you.